On June 28, 1969, a gay bar at Greenwich Village, New York City, was confronted by the police. At this location, an event would unfold that would change the LGBTQIA+ communities forever. The Stonewall uprisings challenged the authority of the officers and proved to the gay movements that they have the ability to fight for their rights. This event established a sense of responsibility for all people to fight for the equality of their sexuality. These conflicts continue to this day, with LGBTQ activists and artists have created posters to raise consciousness about the issue since the movement began. The short-term response to the Stonewall Inns riots marked a change in the LGBTQ activism that rippled through the decades following and impacted the gay rights and gay liberation movements in the United States.
The Library of Congress says that it was not the first time police raided a gay bar, and it was not the first time people fought back, but the events that would unfold over the next 6 days would fundamentally change the surrounding LGBTQ+ activism in the United States. One of the key components that assisted the Stonewall uprising in spreading across the globe was the realization for LGBTQ individuals that they were not alone and were not the only ones who felt too suppressed and wanted to be able to express themselves. While the Stonewall became famous due to the media and annual pride traditions, it was years of LGBTQ+ activism. Historians have recognized that the change in activism, if Stonewall truly was one at all, was the shift mostly for white cisgender people, as people of color and gender-independent people never truly had the benefit of hiding their identities. While the Stonewall are often referred to as riots, Stonewall veterans have explicitly said that they prefer the term Stonewall Uprising or Rebellion. The reference to these uprisings as riots was originally used by police to justify their use of force. The rebellion lasted 5 inconsecutive nights. They were not riots, said the Stonewall Veterans Association.
It is important to emphasize that there were a number of uprisings against police and state brutality, harassment, and entrapment of gay and lesbian in the years before Stonewall. These events and the people involved have not gotten as much historical recognition as Stonewall, but are just essential to understanding LGBTQ histories.
A crowd gathered outside a bar exhibiting visible anger as police detained patrons. Unlike previous incidents, the crowd did not disperse and instead began jeering and jostling the police. Bottles and debris were thrown at the police in a display of defiance. The situation escalated, leading the police to call for reinforcements and barricade themselves inside the bar. Approximately 400 people participated in the riots, reaching the police barricade multiple times. The bar was set on fire during the chaos. Police reinforcements arrived in time to put out the flames and eventually disperse the crowd.
The Stonewall uprisings were a spontaneous protest against the perpetual police harassment and social discrimination suffered by a variety of sexual minorities in the 1960s. Finally, sometime after 4 a.m., things settled down. Amazingly, no one died or was injured on the first night of rioting, though some police officers reported injuries. A group of people celebrate outside the closed Stonewall Inn after the riots. As lesbians showed more public identities, the words gay and lesbian became more well said. A dispute to whether the main focus of their political goals should be feminism or gay rights led to the secession of some lesbian organizations, including the Daughters of Bilitis, which was founded by Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon, but demobilized in 1970 following the disputes over which goal should take preeminence.
Stormy DeLarvier's real name is Viva Hublitz. She used a variety of pronouns, he, they, her. She was a survivor of violence devoted to supporting the LGBTQ+ community. She had lived in a time when interracial marriage was illegal and same-sex relationships were looked down upon. Stormy loved women and was with her partner Diana for 26 years until her death.
Stormy didn't identify as anything but chose to live her life as a black man. She would also refer to herself as a woman in some interviews. It ain't easy being green. is something that Stormy would say throughout her life. She was the one that threw the first punch that sprung the Stonewall Uprising into action. Stormy DeLaVille was born on December 24, 1920 in New Orleans, Louisiana. She died on May 24, 2014 in Brooklyn, New York. Stormy had zero tolerance for discrimination. She was so against discrimination that she even called it ugliness. She had a black mother and a white father. She loved jazz and started to sing in clubs at 15 years old. New York law required every person to wear at least 3 articles of clothing that showed the gender they were assigned at birth. Initially, she tried to obey the law and wear women's clothing on the streets, and only did drag on stage. Once she stopped obeying the law, she was detained for wearing clothing that best suited men. Some of the main riot leaders during the Stonewall alongside DeLaVille were Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, and Miss Major Griffin Gracie.
They helped lead the uprisings and shape the movements of the modern LGBTQ plus movement of equality. Johnson was found dead on July 6, 1992. It was initially ruled as a suicide, even though family friends disputed the ruling. Eventually, her cause of death was deemed undetermined. Rivera died in 2002 from lung cancer after decades of service to the LGBTQ community. In 2014, DeLaVille passed away at the age of 93. Sylvia Rivera was only 17 when the Stonewall Uprising occurred. Even so, she worked tirelessly along with Marsha P. Johnson, advocating for movements and protests for marriage equality and housing accessibility that followed the event. Along with her, the two of them made sure that all people of color, identity, and social standing within the LGBTQ community had their voices heard. Her work made sure that the gay liberal movement was inclusive of everyone.
Marsha P. Johnson was a black transgender woman during the Stonewall Uprising and later an LGBTQ rights activist. She established a STAR group pledged to helping homeless transgender youths in New York City. In an interview with Sylvia Rivera, Seymour Pine, Robert Rivera, Martin Boyce, and many others that experienced the first-hand chaos of their Stonewall riots describe in detail the harassment and fear they experienced throughout their lives, which led to their revolt. Miss Major, another leader of the uprisings, is known for being a veteran of the Stonewall Uprising, a survivor of Attica State Prison, and a human rights activist.
She lets herself be referred to as Mama by many. She advocates fiercely for her girls, trans women of color who have survived police brutality. Miss Major was assigned male at birth, and she gradually began exploring her gender identity. In her teenage years, she met an elderly drag queen, Katie, who taught her to apply makeup and dress. She had faced many transphobic prejudices growing up and continues to help the families of young LGBTQ plus members with access to homes, education, and many other resources. She also actively worked to prevent and reduce the outbreak of HIV and AIDS.
The uprisings represented a pivotal moment in the struggle for LGBTQ plus rights, resulting in greater visibility and validation of LGBTQ plus identities. This acknowledgement of rights set the stage for subsequent advocacy efforts that have driven significant legal reforms across many regions. The events of Stonewall demonstrated the imperative for individuals within the LGBTQ plus community to confront persecution and injustice. The activists involved took it upon themselves to challenge efforts to suppress their identity and to assert the right to live authentically.
The Stonewall riots was the catalyst for the 50 years of LGBT plus rights movements to come. It happened rapidly and was extremely impactful. More organizations and newspaper presses were founded and now have a global reach. In addition, the uprising became the origin of the first Pride parades and Pride Month. In 2015, the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriages. Even global organizations such as UNICEF, UNESCO, and the United Nations have begun speaking against LGBT plus discrimination and have established protocols to measure.
In conclusion, the Stonewall riots led to the decrease of discrimination against the gay and lesbians. Following the events, the LGBTQ plus community was finally granted basic human rights and were able to be accepted socially in many places. This turning point emphasized the importance of accepting people of different genders and people of LGBTQ. Pride Month, mostly started by the events of Stonewall, is widely celebrated in many countries, including Canada, Australia, and Western Europe. This wraps up our podcast for today, The Stonewall Riots, What Really Happened, from me, Erin Heck.
And me, Allison Lowe.
Hope to see you in our next episode.